So that's all I got to say on him. Would you like to go first on this one, or you want me to go first?
I'll have you go first because I know you did so much work on the receivers in this draft. And this is one that definitely has piqued your interest. Jamari Thrash took him in the 5th round. Derek, what are your thoughts on Jamari?
So this is an interesting one, and me and Tristan and I were talking before we started recording, and the one thing I told him, I was like, I am fascinated by this pick because I think Jamari Thrash is either going to be productive for you or he's going to be nothing. I think he is an interesting case. He's an interesting situation. I think there's a lot to like. I also think there's a good amount to dislike. It's fascinating. He's a fascinating player. Do I think this is Anthony Schwartz 2.0? No, I don't. Not at all. But do I think he's going to be an elite receiver? No. Do I think he could be a good receiver? Yeah, I think he does have some potential to be a good receiver. And there's a lot to get into. So let's just start off. Jamari Thrash, he's 6 foot tall, 6'1" on a good day, 188 pounds. So keep that in mind. We'll talk about that later. Ran a 4.46 40-yard dash. He's got good speed. I put / quickness. I think it's more of a quickness versus speed. The question I have is kind of him getting to that next level, kind of that burst. I don't know at an NFL level what that looks like for Jamari Thrash, but he's got a solid release. He is a good vertical deep threat, right? This is a guy that if you send him deep, if you need some speed out there, he can do it. So the Browns get a receiver with a lot of what they needed. They needed speed, they needed quickness, they needed shiftiness. Jamari Thrash is that. But I'll say this, he lacks play strength. He's very thin, struggles with contact. And that was my evaluation of him before the draft, was like, hey, I don't know about this kid because the wind blows just right. I feel like he's getting blown over. So I think he's somebody that really, you want to talk about Mike Hall needing size. I think Jamari Thrash needs to get some size on him. If he gets some size on him, he could be really good. Like, I think he could be really good. Get better playing through contact. He's got a good catch radius. It's not the best, but it's solid. But here's the thing. So he played at Georgia State before he went to Louisville. And at Georgia State, they had him running every route, right? They were using him multiple different ways. He wasn't just kind of that vertical deep threat guy. At Louisville, they had him very limited. It was kind of a lot of hitch routes, a lot of, going deep. So I'm interested to see how the Browns are going to use him because he has proven that he's not just a deep guy. He can run routes. He can. Does he have the most catchable hands? Like, is he going to catch everything his way? No. I know he had a hand injury, and that certainly affected him at some point last season. But I will say this. For a 5th-round receiver, I don't think that this is a bad selection. And I do think he will... I do think he'll have some sort of impact for the Browns this year. I don't necessarily know what his role is going to be long term. I don't know if he's a 5th receiver forever. I don't know if he's a 3rd receiver. It's really hard to tell with Jamari Thrash because, again, you have the Georgia State and then you have the Louisville. And it's 2 different teams using him in 2 different ways. I can tell you at Louisville, he was around a 900-yard receiver. At Georgia State, he had more than that. But he did have, I want to say, like 6-7 touchdowns each as far as both teams. So it's hard to tell. It really is. It's hard to tell what he's going to be. As far as comparing him to somebody, it's not an apples to apples. But I think maybe the Browns see some Will Fuller in him. which excites me because, again, a lot of the same things. He's got the speed, the quickness, but I do think he has more of a route tree than what people initially are thinking. I think a lot of people are really down on this pick. And I'm not going to lie. Are there receivers I would have rather had? Absolutely. I would have rather had a lot of other receivers in this draft. But keep in mind, this was a loaded draft class at wide receiver. Absolutely loaded. And if you're going to grab a receiver in the 5th round, makes a ton of sense. Honestly, I wanted Brendan Rice, and not just because his dad is Jerry Rice, but just because I like a lot of what Brendan does. But what for the Browns were needing, again, with that quickness, that speed aspect, Jamari Thrash is going to give you that. So I'm fascinated. I am fascinated to see what he can do at the NFL level. Because at this moment, Tristan, I'm kind of like, all right, this is a big, I don't even want to say high risk because it's really not being a 5th round pick, but it could potentially be somewhat of a high reward, depending on how you look at it. And I'll shut up here. Last thing I want to say before I hand it over to you. I talked about the long-term plan at wide receiver, right? Now, as we stand today, which Amari Cooper, there was talks about him getting extended, but as we stand today, it's Jeudy, Tillman, Bell, Thrash. I feel a lot better about that than Jeudy, Tillman, Bell, and Prochet, or some other guy like that. So I don't be too down on this pick, but also don't get your hopes up. That's what I'll say on Jamari Thrash. Oh, you know what? Go ahead. Go. I'll say it later. Go ahead.
Okay. So there was only one thing that I disagree with you about Jamari, and that the only thing is size, frame. I don't think he necessarily needs to get like bigger, stronger. I think he can be successful at a smaller size. I think he's got to clean up his technique close to the line of scrimmage. I think that's where he can kind of improve the most, right? Because we've seen these smaller receivers in the NFL have some great success, and they're not necessarily the strongest. Oftentimes they're smaller than Jamari, right? So I think it's more so a technique thing than it is a strength thing. Now, again, that's kind of like a person to person. People are gonna view that differently, right? But regardless, I'll tell you what excites me about Jamari. He does have that explosiveness, that quickness that you really, really love. He run after the catch wise is sensational. I was telling Derek before we started recording, the way that he can just stop on a dime is just so impressive. I mean, he can go one direction and in one footstep be going the other direction just as quick. He is super, super explosive. I really, really like what he can do. And what I will say is this: there are elements to his game where I look at it and I say, I'm willing to bet that the Browns saw Zay Flowers and saw a little bit of a comparison here, saw a little bit of a similarity, and said, maybe we can get something similar out of this guy. Because I think that he has a ceiling around there, but he's got more to work on in his game. That's why he's a 5th round pick. I think that he, for being a 5th round pick, though, is a very promising pick. Because, listen, in a year from now, he could be off the team, and we, whenever we are playing games, like trying to remember old Browns, we pick out his name, and people are like, oh my God, I forgot. Like, yeah. Mm-hmm. Like Antonio Callaway. Right? Like, guys that, listen, it's a high ceiling pick. We'll see what can come from it. But I like what he has. With that being said, I don't see him getting on the field a lot this year. Next year is where I kind of see, I think he could get onto the field a decent chunk, depending on how he develops. I think that this is their Elijah Moore replacement. I really do. The more and more I look at his film, I say, that's a lot of the stuff that they tried to do with Elijah earlier in the year. And, I think that is kind of his role. But he's got speed in space. He's killer. I think that, there's a role for him here. Absolutely, there's a role. And we'll see what he can turn into. But I will say this: he is somebody that I think should be sticking to Amari Cooper's side. Amari, tell me how to be better around the line of scrimmage, right? Because if he can get good, right, just NFL kind of starter caliber, right, working technique off the line of scrimmage, I think that he could really explode and be a very, very good role, a very, very good third option for the Browns moving forward. I think that's kind of a ceiling for us. I don't see him being anything more than, a slot option or, a third option, that guy that you can throw on the boundary if you want to kick Coop or kick Judy inside for a snap. I think that that's where his kind of role is, but he could be good. I think he could be very productive.
Yeah. So one of the things I wanted to throw in on Jamari Thrash, and Steve Smith Sr., I was telling Tristan before, I went back and kind of rewatched what he was saying, because he does a very good breakdown and evaluation on every one of these receivers. The one thing that he said that I thought was interesting was he was consistently over and over and over one thing in college, and that is a chain mover, which I find fascinating because normally that's reserved for the big receivers, that's reserved for the jump ball guys that if you need to rely on them on third down, there you are. You know what I mean? But Jamari consistently was that. And I think a big part of that is you turn on the tape and he is a very smart player. He's good working back to the quarterback. He's good finding holes in the zone and, knowing how to get the most out of his yards. You know what I'm saying? So what he lacks in physicality, he makes up for in smarts, which football IQ is a big thing, especially at the NFL level. So, again, I think there's a lot of good, but I do think there is some concern to be had here. Again, this is a 5th-round wide receiver that we're talking about here. And if you can get production out of a 5th-round receiver, that's a big deal. So, all in all, I like it. I would grade it. I'm not even going to grade it. We'll do that at some point later. But I'm excited to watch some more film on him. I already watched plenty leading up to the draft. But now that he is a member of the Browns, I'm interested to go back and watch more of him at Georgia State, more of him at Louisville, and just kind of compare and contrast the differences. So, but moving on.
We all know how much you love your receivers, so you're going to be all over this.
Yeah.
For sure.